Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Shubh, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about my favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe movie of all time. And if you've been following along with the chronology, you know that it's Thor Ragnarok. If you've been following along with everything I've had to say about this movie for the last maybe 4 weeks that we've been doing this, there's no movie in this entire cinematic universe that I can think of that is anywhere close to Thor Ragnarok as a film, because it means so much, not only to the franchise, but also to the tone moving forward. So the thing I like most about Thor Ragnarok is that it's literally a cultural reset within the MCU, because, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but there's a complete change in tone between Thor Ragnarok and the first two Thor films, which is obvious from the first instance of this movie. A lot of it is to do with director Taika Waititi. He's one of my favorite directors. I'm obsessed with his happy sad comedy, as it's called, and it's something that... So Thor, as we know, started in the MCU with a pretty rough start. The first two phases of the MCU, he appeared in Thor, obviously, in Thor 2. Now, Thor was elegant, but it was timid. It introduced the magical features in an otherwise science and technology-driven world, but it did so very timidly. He then made it into Thor 2, which, wasn't that great. He was lost in Joss Whedon's Avengers, the first one. It was the least defined, despite, his adopted brother being the chief villain of the movie. Thor: The Dark World, it was entertaining, but it wasn't one of the best MCU movies, like we've talked about. And finally, in Age of Ultron, Joss Whedon had to compromise on Thor's character arc, so that a lot of it didn't really make sense. So, you have a lot of faithfully adapted elements from the comics, but Marvel Studios at this point was yet to find real success with Thor on film. But this is his third solo, and third solos obviously always have tended to bring some sort of new, bold direction into the franchises. You look at Iron Man 3 with Shane Black. He stripped Tony Stark of what made him Iron Man, the technology. You look at Civil War, it blew up into this huge Avengers type of movie and moved Captain America from a patriot to an insurgent. So, the third Thor film obviously had potential to find the right way to approach this character. Obviously, no one wanted a new direction more than Chris Hemsworth. In 2017, he did an interview with Vanity Fair leading up to the release of Thor Ragnarok, and he recounted his sort of boredom and frustration with Thor, especially after Age of Ultron. He was dissatisfied with the seriousness and the high fantasy approach, and he wanted a more unpredictable direction, something like James Gunn and the Guardians of the Galaxy. Chris Hemsworth's feelings, they were taken into account after hearing professional fanboy Kevin Smith criticize MCU's Thor on a podcast. Now, Hemsworth considers Smith as a representative of the larger sort of fan community, and he felt that his concerns were shared by the fans, and they were. You know, Ragnarok started to get developed, and Chris Hemsworth wanted to strip Thor down of all of everything in terms of the mythological allusions. You know, losing the cape, the hammer, the long blonde hair, go into more comedic elements. Previously, the movies had taken Thor quite seriously. You know, he was a 1,000-year-old alien god of thunder with a very rich Shakespearean undertones in his story. But Chris Hemsworth, I keep saying Luke. Chris Hemsworth wanted to make use of his talents in comedy in this role, and you see that sort of comic talent come through in this movie. Kevin Feige, he obviously, the chief architect of the MCU, accepted these bold suggestions, and as he saw it, Branagh had already done a faithful adaptation of the character, but Thor he had a presence, So screenwriters, they wanted to sort of emphasize that. They chose to include Hulk as a supporting character in this movie. Mark Ruffalo also wanted a new sort of route for his character, and beginning with this movie, starts the great Hulk arc that leads up to Endgame. All of this, it shows that by the 17th movie, the MCU is still willing to allow its main characters to take ownership of their characters. They want to dictate major changes. They want to get the real, most authentic performances out of these actors. The screenwriters of the film, Chris Kyle and Christopher Yost at first, then Stephanie Folsom, and finally Eric Pearson, they wanted these major character changes as well. They created a wildly subversive plot in which they would occur, and the film is best remembered for the glee and the humor that it brought and tore apart the Thor mythology with. And obviously a lot of that is accredited to Taika Waititi. Taika Waititi is a New Zealand-born director, best known for writing and directing smaller-scale films at this point. He has a very distinctive brand of offbeat humor with surprising poignancy, happy, sad comedy, like I called it. He's got a few short films under his belt. He had a few really great features, Boy, What We Do in the Shadows, which has now become a TV series on FX, as well as Hunt for the Wilder People, which is a movie that I believe everyone should watch. Marvel Studios is known for hiring lesser-known but talented and distinctive directors to helm these big films, hoping that, their unique style will add a injection of freshness into the MCU, and Taika Waititi was the latest in such a long line of these up-and-coming talents given control of a blockbuster series. Indeed, he was given a lot of control with this movie. He considered the screenplay a jumping-off point and rewrote so much of the dialogue, encouraging a lot of improvisation on the set. So as I said, I'm a huge Taika Waititi fan. So I listened to a lot of his interviews about this, and one thing I remember he mentions is the fact that the jokes that come in an MCU script, he said were written in the way that, you'd come up with a joke in a boardroom, and it's funny for a boardroom. It's not funny for a movie. The best way to come up with something is in the moment, and that sort of improvisational humor really brings this film out, and it helps when you have such talented actors like Jeff Goldblum and Tessa Thompson and Chris Hemsworth and even Taika Waititi to work off of. Taika Waititi's performance as Korg in this film is absolutely incredible. I love Korg. I love Korg so much. He's such a funny character. We're going to start a revolution. Do you want to join? No, I can't do the accent. Anyway, Taika Waititi, he saw Thor as this privileged Asgardian rich kid, essentially. and he can't be relatable unless he's stripped of that privilege. So he was excited to sort of dismantle what came before to build something new. And, that's really the idea behind this entire film. This movie is about dismantling the old and setting up a new. It's about change. It's about reincarnation. One of the funniest aspects of Guardians of the Galaxy is how it undercuts every sort of heroic or emotional scene with comedy, and it doesn't allow it ever to be taken seriously. Thor Ragnarok takes that even further. Waititi claimed that he was surprised by the latitude that he was given to add humor to emotional moments. And he gives Marvel Studios a lot of credit for allowing him so much freedom and ensuring that, the film stayed on track despite all the craziness. I remember him describing filming Thor Ragnarok as just a holiday in Australia with the lads. To be clear, this film is absolutely crazy. There's 46 Marvel movies overall, including 17 movies, and this is like beyond the MCU. This is the strongest, most colorful, most out there aesthetic of a comic book film. And no movie has ever felt so stylistically comic booky. Taika Waititi gets his influences from Jack Kirby and the science fiction B movies, like Flash Gordon. He presents these visuals with the highest possible budget, obviously, and quality. He has this retro-sounding synth-infused score by Mark Mothersbaugh. There's an exciting big-budget upgrade to the sci-fi films of the 70s and 80s. It's like Star Wars and Raiders, and you upgrade all those weird adventure serials from like the 30s. Narratively, all of these influences, though, they come from Walt Simonson's definitive run on Thor in the 80s. You have a lot of interesting characters like Scourge and Surtur and Hela. The film also adapts a lot of elements from 2006-2007 run of Planet Hulk for Incredible Hulk, written by Greg Pak. Now that story talks about Hulk enslaved on an alien planet, forced to fight as a gladiator. And MCU fans really wanted that to be the next Hulk solo film, but Marvel didn't really want to make another solo film, so they incorporated Planet Hulk into Ragnarok. Marvel began preparing the audiences for Taika Waititi's brand of humor with 2 Team Thor shorts. And, while I say Thor Ragnarok is my favorite movie, it's my favorite feature. My favorite piece of visual art that's come out of the MCU are these Team Thor shorts.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
They're non-canonical mockumentary-style shorts written and directed by Waititi during the production of Ragnarok. You see Thor living in Australia with his roommate Daryl, wondering why he wasn't contacted to participate in Civil War. Most of the humor comes from Thor being a bad roommate. He's bored with a lack of direction, out of touch with Earth culture. It has moments of things like, Mjolnir resting with a tiny pillow and a drawer next to Thor's bed. It's very awkward and very obviously improvised dialogue. It feels like The Office, There's an irreverence towards Thor character that's fun, but it's pretty much an accurate indication of what Ragnarok is going to be. I've enjoyed Thor in a lot of comics and films, but He's never been my favorite Marvel character. You know, given that, Thor Ragnarok blew it out of the water. I adore this movie. It's the funniest movie in the MCU, which is saying something. It's easily the best Thor film. It has great humor with trashy sci-fi aesthetic, but also great action and a very surprisingly touchy character work. It's very cavalier about the previous Thor films. It doesn't bypass lingering plot and character threads, and immediately done away. It's done away with any elements that the people involved deemed unimportant. But the elements that remain are so perfectly depicted that, you know, the newly introduced elements become even more entertaining because the overall film is so fun and quickly feels like the version of Thor that should have been there from day one. Chris Hemsworth, as I said, has the opportunity now to have fun with the character, and he obviously relished every second. And Jeff Goldblum has been the most Jeff Goldblum ever in this film. Waititi, his collaborators, they took the MCU's most uneven lead and put him in this new direction with such singularity of vision. I think that's probably what makes it such a strong film in general. It's that, you know, it's a delight, and it comes from a very strong vision of what direction you want to take this character in. So the first 25 minutes of Ragnarok happen at this incredible whiplash pace. You know, there's easily a lot of plot and incident in this film to sort of in this section itself to fill half a film. But the Waititi, he was intent on disregarding any elements they didn't want necessary. You know, this has ample time to explore the new elements for the rest of the film. There's a rapid pace, but these scenes don't feel rushed, you know, because it's got a charismatic cast with a light tone and very witty writing. It's a lot of fun surprises that make this section an exciting ride. You know, case in point, the film opens with Thor in a hanging cage. And you expect it to go like, oh no, Thor's in a cage, how did this happen? And, you know, it's like a parody of most blockbuster openings. Thor summarizes everything that's happened in a couple of exposition lines. You know, he saves Earth a couple times, went looking for the Infinity Stones. He last appeared in the Age of Ultron at this point. He was heading out to the cosmos to look into the emergence of the Infinity Stones, but in a casual line in his opening scene, Thor says that he didn't find anything, and he moved on to investigating the visions that he's experiencing. With that line, you know, they disregard completely Thor's mission at the end of Age of Ultron or trying to tie into the larger Infinity Saga, even though at the end of the film they are sort of forced into it. Thor's revealed to be talking to a giant skeleton in a cage. The skeleton's jaw falls off as Thor finishes his speech. And then you see Thor wrapped in chains and hoisted behind this skeleton, who is Surtur, voiced by Clancy Brown. Surtur goes on in a monologue about portentously about like how he is destined to dip his crown in the eternal flame of Asgard and destroy Asgard in a glorious Ragnarok. Thor asks him to pause his threats multiple times as his chain spins him around. Instantly, we know who the new Thor is. Instantly, we know what the tone of this film is going to be. Hands down, one of the best openings of a Marvel. Surtur reveals that he's not going to carry out his plan because Odin is not on Asgard. And this is news to Thor, because Thor then says a snappy one-liner, summons Mjolnir, and you know, his hammer is delayed for a second. But when it arrives, Thor begins fighting Surtur and his minions to Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin. Now, this is an incredibly classic rock song about Viking pillaging, and you know, there's a mention of a hammer of the gods. I'm surprised this has never shown up in a Thor film before. The reason this song made it into this film is because Waititi used it as part of his sizzle reel to impress Kevin Feige and, you know, the Marvel top brass in giving him this job. It's part of his audition, and it's kind of what got him the movie, honestly. Thor, he defeats Surtur, takes the giant crown, calls Heimdall to beam him back to Asgard through the Bifrost. we see that Heimdall's no longer in charge of the Bifrost, and that Scourge, who's played by Karl Urban, has replaced him. Scourge is initially distracted from Thor's call as he shows off the merchandise that he's stolen from Earth. A pair of Asgardian women. He arrives on Asgard and finds a giant statue of Loki and a performance of a play glorifying Loki's death in Thor the Dark World. Actors portray Loki. Matt Damon plays Loki, and Luke Hemsworth, brother of Chris Hemsworth, finally an actual accurate use of Luke, plays Thor, and Sam Neill plays Odin. There's a choir performing Brian Tyler's score from that film, that bit. And it's rare to see the sequel of a film parodying the last film. But Ragnarok is pretty unconventional. The Thor the Dark World ended with the revelation that Loki faked his death and impersonated Odin to take over the throne of Asgard. It was a fantastic cliffhanger. Fans waited almost 4 years for it to be resolved. This satire and Hopkins' hammy performance of Loki impersonating Odin, it makes it clear that Ragnarok was not going to match what Thor the Dark World did, because it's so much better. Thor quickly forces Loki to reveal himself in a very funny. He throws the hammer and waits for it to come back and smash his face. So this is another plot thread from the last movie discarded. Unfortunately, Loki left Odin under a spell in a New York retirement home, and that building was demolished when they go to Earth to check it out. Thor and Loki converse, and it's revealed that Thor and Jane have broken up, so another element is discarded. Natalie Portman was also not entirely happy with Marvel Studios at this point, especially after the fiasco with Patty Jenkins in the last film. She wasn't. I don't think she was contractually obliged to appear in this film. She didn't appear in this film. She gets credited for Endgame. I can't remember if she appears or not. I'll have to watch that movie again when I do the episode for that. But that's another element that's discarded from the plot of the Dark World. Loki disappears through a portal. Thor is directed to the sanctum of Doctor Strange. And Doctor Strange is here. He's clearly more advanced in the mystical arts since his movie. And he questions why Thor would bring someone as dangerous as Loki to Earth. Strange helps Thor and Loki find Odin. There's a lot of jokes in this section. Strange shuttles Thor around the sanctum. Releases Loki from the portal, and Loki falls, and he's like, "I've been falling for 30 minutes." Love that line. He sends the brothers to Norway, and that ends Doctor Strange's brief appearance. Oh, I forgot to mention the beer thing. Doctor Strange asks Thor if he wants something to drink, and he's like, "Nah, I don't really drink tea." And then a glass of beer just appears in his hand. He appears in this movie as one of the fun products of being a part of such a huge cinematic universe. It's a plot device to get things moving, but his scenes are so funny. I would love to see a Taika Waititi Doctor Strange movie. I'd love to see a Taika Waititi all of these movies. Thor and Loki, they find Odin in Norway, staring off of a cliff. This is the only scene that sort of slows things down and adds a little emotional, genuine moment of emotion and drama. A lot of the motifs in Waititi's filmmaking are to do with the father-son relationships of his characters. Especially true in movies like Boy. But here is a chance for Waititi to sort of take that from his toolbox and put it in the audience's face early on to the film. Odin talks about his deceased wife, Frigga, calling to him. Thor thinks it's a part of Loki's spell, but Odin is just reflecting on his love and his life and knows that death is approaching. He refers to Thor and Loki as his sons. Loki obviously feels shocked because he's adopted. And it effectively calls back to Loki's confusion of his adoption and Thor with Frigga's death in the Dark World. Demonstrates that Waititi didn't discard the films that come before this entirely. The emotionally resonant beats of the last few films still show up in this film, because that's why it doesn't feel like this movie is completely out of place, because even though it's a completely different tone and visual style and even narrative style, it's still following and taking into account the beats and emotional moments of sort of perseverance that Thor and the other characters in this franchise have gone through so far. Odin turns into glowing dust. He floats off the cliff. The scene it's bittersweet, it's poignant, and there's an added weight with the absence of humor. Thor blames Loki for Odin's death. The brothers square up to almost fight, but then a portal shows up and Hela is revealed. Thor throws Mjolnir at her and she catches it with one hand and it shatters. So there goes the hammer. No more hammer for Thor. Loki and Thor attempt to escape to Asgard on the Bifrost, but that's a stupid idea because then Hela attacks them and joins them in the Bifrost and gets out of they both get kicked out into the cosmos. Once on Asgard, Hela, she kills Volstagg and Fandral. They're members of Thor's posse. But yeah, I guess you guys don't really even know who they are. I can't remember which ones they are. And that's the incredibly fast-paced Act 1 of Thor Ragnarok. By this point, Thor has been discarded of his love interest, his companions, his father, his weapon, and as well as the cliffhanger from the Dark World and the mission from Age of Ultron. He's got a few more elements to be discarded, obviously. Hogun, Thor's cape, Thor's hair, his right eye, all of Asgard. But the rest of Ragnarok is mostly devoted to rebuilding this world with its fresh new approach. There's a new cast, new tone, new style, and above all, comedy. The opening section moves quickly because Waititi is more interested in where Thor spends his time in the middle of the story. And that portion has a lot more time to breathe. But before we follow Thor, let's talk a little bit about Hela on Asgard. So Hela is the true heir to the throne of Asgard. She and Odin conquered the 9 realms in Asgard's name a long time ago, before Odin decided to live in peace.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
So he imprisoned Hela because of her bloodthirsty ways, and rewrote the history of Asgard to exclude her. He, upon her return, Hela, she wants to lead Asgard's army to finish what they started, to conquer the rest of the cosmos like the old days. She wants to basically make Asgard great again. The cowardly Scourge, he follows Hela, but the army led by Hogun refuses. Hela proceeds to destroy the army single-handedly and generates this endless supply of sharp weapons out of her body. She's a long-time character from the Thor comics, but her design in the film comes from the Jason Aaron run in 2014. Her powers are taken from another villain in the same run, actually. She resurrects her long-dead army and a giant wolf from deep in the vaults of Asgard and prepares to invade the galaxy. She finds that Heimdall has prevented her from leaving Asgard, but Heimdall proceeds to sort of secretly evacuate the city. These Asgard scenes, they sort of bring back moments from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings film series. There's another New Zealand connection right there. Her voice in this scene, Kate Blanchett and Karl Urban were in that trilogy, actually. And Blanchett doesn't have that many scenes in Ragnarok, but she has an incredible villain performance. She has a regal voice. There's a cleaner makeup and smoother hair as she gathers her power. And the opposite happens as she grows angry or violent. The story plays out in a lot of cutaways from Thor's storyline to keep Hela in the minds of viewers before the climax. The centerpiece of this film, however, where the most of the attention of the film is devoted, is the planet Sakaar. Now, Sakaar is at the bottom of countless wormholes, like a giant galactic trash heap. Whoever lands there, Thor lands there after being thrown off the Bifrost and is attacked by scavengers who rip off his cape. There's another thing gone. They're dispersed by Scrapper 142, who's played by Tessa Thompson, who comes into the story full of presence. She's chugging a bottle of booze, falling off her ship, and Thor finds himself strapped into a chair moving through a psychedelic tunnel of lights, while Pure Imagination from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory plays. The narrator explains that Sakaar is ruled by the Grandmaster. The ride moves faster. Thor lets out a high-pitched scream until he's out of the tunnel and finds himself immobile in the face of the Grandmaster himself, Jeff Goldblum. Jeff Goldblum is in rare form in this film. He's jovial, he's eccentric, he's distracted, condescending, and menacing. When Thor, he can't summon lightning, as he describes himself as the god of thunder, and then Grandmaster nicknames him Sparkles and pronounces Asgard as Asgard. He takes Thor on a tour of his quarters, he liquefies his cousin, and breaks out of a keyboard solo. There's a deleted section of the scene where he melts his cousin, and it's just it's so funny. I can't help but laugh when I think about it. Just go on YouTube and look it up, honestly, because I can't even describe how funny it is. It's Thor Ragnarok, cousin melting, deleted scene. Overall, though, the Grandmaster is excited by the arrival of Thor. Scrapper 142 found the beloved gladiatorial champion that is referred to in this part, and now she's brought a possible contender. The Grandmaster claims that Thor can fight the champion in the arena to earn his freedom, and Sakaar section sort of borrows heavily from the Planet Hulk storyline, which itself comes from Ridley Scott's Gladiator. Thor is thrown into the dungeon with other gladiators like Korg, who's played by Taika Waititi. He's a large rock creature with a soft New Zealand accent and very offbeat humor. Korg tells Thor that he shouldn't be afraid of a rock unless he's made of scissors. That was a rock, paper, scissors joke for you. He was imprisoned because he attempted to start a revolution, but failed because he didn't print enough pamphlets. Thor attempts to explain the loss of Mjolnir to Korg, which he misunderstands as a euphemism for masturbation. Korg is so funny. Oh my god, the hemorrhage you. That scene is completely improvised, and you can just tell it is because it's so funny. Loki lands on Sakaar weeks earlier, probably because of Einsteinian relativity, and has manipulated his way into the Grandmaster's court and intends to usurp him and become the leader of Sakaar. He offers to help Thor, but Thor is fed up with Loki and his scheming, so this is another refreshing turn for the series, with the larger events overshadowing Loki's predictable manipulations. The film uses this development actually to grow Loki as a character, because Thor is no longer opposing his schemes, so he begins to consider a different path. Finally, Thor learns that Scrapper 142 is actually a member of the Valkyrie, who are a group of female Asgardian warriors. Thor rambles through this condescending speech about the value of female warriors, but she insists on just drinking her life away in Sakaar rather than helping him. The scenes in Sakaar are uniform and excellent. Grandmaster Korg and Valkyrie are fun new characters, and Thor and Loki develop in very interesting new ways. Sakaar has a very cheap and trashy 70s sci-fi aesthetic matched by the score, as I said. Ragnarok sort of feels like a trashy 70s TV movie, but the fact that it has such advanced design, effects, crisp writing, humor, credible characters, and very emotional beats gives that top quality feel while still retaining the low quality fun. Thor is prepared for his arena fight by getting the most painful looking haircut from Stan Lee, and then we lose Thor's long hair. He enters the massive arena, and an enormous hologram of the Grandmaster announces the fight against his beloved champion. Thor, he puts on a helmet with wings that looks more like his comic book helmet, and prepares to face his foe, and the Hulk bursts out of the doorway. Had this been a surprise rather than revealed in the first trailer, Hulk's entrance would have been one of the most incredible moments in the MCU. But, credit to the film, it's still a great moment, despite the lack of the element of surprise. There's an apprehension. It's undercut by humor, obviously, because he shouts, "Yes, we know each other, he's a friend from work." Despite Thor's excitement and friendliness, Hulk still goes on to fight. Thor surprises the crowd by matching the Hulk's strength, and he he tries to calm Hulk down by going through the sun's getting real low gag from Age of Ultron, but then he smashed around like a ragdoll, paying homage to the classic scene with Loki. Thor gets angry. He says, "You're embarrassing me. I told him we were friends," and he channels his lightning powers without the assistance of Mjolnir. But the Grandmaster, before Thor can win, stuns him with his obedience disc affixed to his neck, allowing the Hulk to win. This is following in the comic book tradition of two super strong heroes fighting, but the fight ending unresolved to not confirm which one is actually stronger. Thor wakes up in Hulk's room, finding Hulk in a hot tub, and he emerges naked. He explains that the Avengers jet was sucked through a wormhole at the end of Age of Ultron, and he landed here. And Hulk enjoys his life as a champion. He's no interest in helping Thor escape. He's happy where he is. It's all explained in a very rudimentary toddler-like vocabulary that Hulk has developed. It's very important because the Hulk at this point has been on Sakaar for a really long time, and he's been the Hulk for a really long time. Waititi imagined Hulk as this 3-year-old, very simple-minded, very prone to emotional outbursts, very fond of small pleasures. It's the best version of the Hulk depicted on screen up to this point because, you pair his angry strength and the sort of very adult issue of managing your anger with the antics of a child. Thor and Hulk, they argue about each other's feelings and hurt each other's feelings until Thor approaches Hulk like a parent talking to a child. As, Hulk, he helps Thor eventually. He talks to Valkyrie, who reveals that she and the Valkyries were defeated when trying to prevent Hela's escape years ago. She refuses to help, but Thor steals the controller to his obedience disc from her and escapes to the Avengers jet. Hulk now attempts to stop him, but Thor accidentally pulls up a video of Black Widow from Age of Ultron, and it calms Hulk down enough to transform back to Bruce Banner for the first time in 2 years. Now, Mark Ruffalo's Banner has always been fun to watch, but in Ragnarok he takes this character to huge neurotic heights. He's shocked to be on another planet full of weird alien sights and sounds and aliens, he begins to have an anxiety attack, and he's horrified that he's been stuck as the Hulk for so long, and he's worried that he's going to lose himself if he's transformed into Hulk again. He feels betrayed when it becomes clear that Thor was the Hulk, not Banner. Thor wants the Hulk, not Banner, to help defeat Hela. But meanwhile, the Grandmaster, he blames Loki and Valkyrie for Thor's escape and demands that he's found.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Valkyrie finds Thor, but she's confused by the presence of a stressed-out human who's following him around. Regardless, she agrees to help him with Hela. This uncreatively then calls themselves the Revengers. Valkyrie offers Loki up to the team, but Banner and Thor don't want to because they don't think they can trust him. In a very hilarious improvised speech by Chris Hemsworth, Thor recounts his story from his childhood with Loki. There was once a time when we were children, he transformed himself to a snake. He knows that I love snakes, so I went to pick up the snake to admire it, and he transformed back into himself, and he was like, "Blur, it's me," and he stabbed me. Loki then joins the Revengers. Korg and the gladiators from the dungeon start a revolution, Korg's dear beloved revolution, as a diversion while the Revengers steal a ship. They fly through the largest wormhole on Sakaar, dubbed the Devil's Anus, to return to Asgard. This is B-movie action of the highest order. Thor and Loki fight side by side with laser weapons as they talk about their relationship. Thor, he insists that he doesn't care about Loki's schemes, and he supports his decision to stay on Sakaar. He then suggests doing get help when they reach the ship area, which Loki refuses. Then the elevator opens and Thor is holding a wounded-looking Loki and shouting "Get help" to distract the security guards. Obviously, he then throws Loki at the guards and is pleased with his classic scheme working one more time. I might try that, actually. I feel like that would work in some situations. Loki tries to betray Thor, but after so many betrayals, Thor has sort of expected it, and he electrocutes Loki. Meanwhile, the Grandmaster is occupied with the slave revolution, but he's uncomfortable with the word slave, much preferring prisoners with jobs. Thor steals the Grandmaster's party ship, and he and Valkyrie take out the pursuing ships as they approach the Anus. In the early drafts of the script, Thor and Valkyrie developed a romantic relationship as expected in this type of movie, but thank goodness for the fact that it was changed, because there's just a mutual platonic respect, and I feel like that's just much more interesting. Thor, Valkyrie, and Banner, they fly through the Anus, and Loki takes over Korg's revolution on Sakaar. This ends the most entertaining Sakaar section, bringing Thor back to the conflict with Hela for the climax. The film, it doesn't lose any fun or momentum in the final scene, but it feels a little bit more conventional. Heimdall attempts to lead the Asgardians down the Rainbow Bridge to escape Asgard, but they're blocked on both sides by Hela's forces. Thor sends Banner and Valkyrie to help while he distracts Hela in the throne room. Valkyrie tries to hold off the army, but Hela's giant wolf attacks, and then Banner decides to become the Hulk, even though he may not become a human again. And, it's a very, 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 very emotional decision that he's making here, but it's still undercut with glorious comedy. He jumps out of the ship heroically and then hunks onto the bridge. and just lays there lifeless for a moment. And then eventually, he turns onto the Hulk and starts to fight the wolf. The Asgardians are still overwhelmed, obviously, until Loki and Korg arrive in a large ship to transport the rest of the people. And that's Loki's arc. In the throne room, Thor admits that he never really wanted to rule Asgard, and even so, he can't let Hela take the throne because she's the worst. They fight, and Hela slices out Thor's right eye, which matches Odin's, and as she tries to kill Thor, he mentally communes with Odin. Thor claims that he can't defeat Hela because he's lost his hammer, but Odin says, "Are you Thor, god of hammers?" and reveals that Mjolnir was only created to channel Thor's lightning power, not to create it. He also explains to Thor that Asgard is a people, not a place, giving him the inspiration that he needs. Asgard is a people, not a place is just a beautiful battle cry. What follows is this huge blockbuster moment, made all more powerful by the lack of humorous undercutting. Thor gets his full lightning powers, striking Hela with a massive lightning bolt. Immigrant Song comes back as he soars towards the Rainbow Bridge. I think the only sort of fighting scene for Thor that matches this sort of intensity is his first appearance on the battlefield in Wakanda in Infinity War. I remember watching that the first time and actually having a tear in my eye because it was so beautiful. Thor attacks these troops alongside Valkyrie, Heimdall, Loki, and Korg, and Hulk still fighting the giant wolf. All of this happens with the Immigrant Song blaring. It's a tremendously fun scene. Hela attacks Thor again, and Thor must make a desperate play to defeat her. Because Hela draws her power from Asgard the planet, and since its citizens have already evacuated onto Korg's ship, Asgard has to be destroyed. And Thor sends Loki into the vaults to place Surtur's crown into the eternal flame, resurrecting Surtur and allowing him to carry out the prophesied destruction of Asgard. Now, as Loki carries out this plan, he reconsiders the Tesseract and the vault for a second, but Thor and Valkyrie hold off Hela in the bridge. Hela's armies threaten to overwhelm Korg's ship as Scourge leaps out to mow them with his assault rifles. It's an homage to the classic moment in Thor number 362 from 1985, where Scourge, who was a longtime villain, sacrifices his life to help the Asgardians escape from Hela. It's a classic moment in the film, but it's mostly really an afterthought. Surtur begins to destroy Asgard. Hela fights him. Hulk tries to join in. He wants to fight a huge monster, but Thor orders him back into the ship because he knows that Hulk can probably defeat him. As they fly away, Asgard falls to ruins while Thor and his companions watch. Korg says, hopefully, the foundations are strong and it can be rebuilt as a haven for peoples throughout the cosmos. Then Asgard is vaporized and Korg says, never mind, the foundations are gone. Even the destruction of Asgard, Ragnarok itself, is undercut with comedy in this film. Thor fits himself with an eye patch. He reconciles with Loki, and then he takes the throne of Asgard. The people, not the place. The ascension to king has been coming since the early scenes of the first movie, and he quotes Patrick Doyle's theme from the last film as a nice nod. Thor and his ship of refugees, they set course for the Earth. Thor Ragnarok created a bold and beautiful new direction for the Thor series. It's arguably one of the best films of the MCU. It's definitely the best film in the series. It makes the character universally appealing. It disregards a bunch of high fantasy and hazy mythology for a very trashy and hilarious sci-fi adventure. The filmmakers, they got rid of established elements with casualness, like a callousness almost. But a good callous. I feel like callous has a negative connotation. Nonchalance in a good way. They strip Thor down to his core and develop the remaining elements and introduce new ones with really great heart and humor to create a fantastic new status quo. In the process, Thor becomes more relatable, more enjoyable as a character and as a film series. The movie's mostly remembered for Waititi's particular brand of offbeat, irreverent humor, but it succeeds because Waititi is committed to strong characters, and the humor comes from the characters, not just for the sake of jokes. It includes poignant emotional currents. it's a feature of his best films, and it's by far one of my favorite Marvel movies, and I think it should be considered among one of the best superhero movies of all time. Obviously, it doesn't have the cultural relevance or the perfection of the genre, or like the Avengers, but it doesn't really approach its subject with the seriousness and maturity of Spider-Man 2 or The Dark Knight or even Logan. But Thor Ragnarok is so good because it perfectly captures the excitement and the fun and the utter joy of a wacky comic book movie. Admittedly, the humor in this movie is not for everyone, and obviously there's going to be diehard fans who weren't happy with it, but they were the minority. Thor Ragnarok eventually earned $315 million in North America, which is a 38% increase from The Dark World, and it earned a whopping $854 million worldwide, which is a 32% increase from The Dark World. Clearly, mainstream audiences endorse this version. To give this context, Ragnarok was released 2 weeks before Justice League, which is the DCEU's version of the Avengers. That film should have been at least as commercially successful as the Avengers, but due to the horrible quality and the complete mishandling of the DCEU by Warner Brothers, Justice League became the lowest grossing DCEU movie at that point, and it earned far less than Ragnarok. For a film about Thor to earn significantly more than the first screen team-up of Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Aquaman, and Cyborg is ridiculous, unless you consider the importance of quality. And Thor Ragnarok is a quality film. Audiences recognize that, they flock to the theaters, and Marvel Studios was so pleased with this that they started developing a fourth, the forthcoming Thor Love and Thunder in 2021, hopefully. Neither Iron Man or Captain America earned a fourth film in their respective series, but Marvel realized that they finally cracked the code to producing good Thor movies, and the studio, all that they needed to do was rip him down to his core. I think one of the most important things to consider about the fourth Thor movie is the fact that Thor Ragnarok was a cultural reset, like I said, for Marvel, but also for Thor, and it felt like the first in a new trilogy, rather than the third in an old one. Anyway, with that, let's call it an episode. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. You can follow us on Twitter at GSMC_movies or on Facebook at GSMC Movie Podcast. You can also find me on my friend Matthew's podcast, A Filmmaker's History, available wherever you listen to podcasts. We're almost done with Disney, and it's been quite fun talking with Matthew over the last few months. Thank you for listening. This has been Shubh Nanda, and go watch a Taika Waititi movie if you haven't already. I love Jojo Rabbit, but watch Boy. Boy is incredible. Alright, take care.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.